you have a secret weapon here. You have your media apparatus, and you do better views than MSNBC.
Even on the second, I've created a Viva PPC channel, which is specifically for messaging for the political stuff, because I don't want the main channel to turn into political messaging. But they want to shut us out. Good. I put out a vlog breaking down Justin Trudeau's second ethics violation. It got 100,000 views. I mean, that's CBC level stuff in terms of viewership, and it gets shared and it gets liked above all else. CBC, sometimes they get a lot of views and they get ratioed in the thumbs down. Yeah. And they get, ratioed in the comments to the point where they disable comments. I'm reaching people with the truth, not necessarily even political messaging, just truth, or at least what I think is the truth. Right. Working social media is it's, again, another skill that I've acquired over the last 5 years. I had no idea I would be using that muscle in this leg of the decathlon, but I am, and it's proven to be very useful.
I remember when Brett Weinstein was trying to put together his dark horse candidate duo in the United States. And we talked on the phone, and he asked me who I thought should run. I gave him a couple names. But the number one thing I told him was that any candidate you pick has to be networked. And by that, I mean, you have to bring your own social media army to this battle. You can't come at it if you're going to be an outsider. If you're going to affect any kind of change that any of us are interested in, then you can't go through the normal apparatus. And you have to bring your big brother, your big cousin, whatever, this big stick that you have, which is, if you don't include me on this local thing that's only going to really get 15,000 views, boss, we're going to do this other thing where we're going to get 150,000 and we're going to send it all over the world. And that's a pressure. That's a pressure that you have as an advantage. Do any of your other candidates have similar social media profile?
Not that I know of. I mean, Maxime Bernier's got a big following, but the funny thing is, some of them are going to grow their following now exponentially because people are going to discover them. It is, I've called it the political Streisand effect. It only works, suppression only works so well, and it really only works locally because you can bring that suppression to not to the national level, but make it more public, and then people learn, and then people start saying, well, why are they suppressing? And they start looking into it. So you can only get away with it for so long. But the interesting thing is, like, my Twitter feed, my Twitter following it was always modest, but now it's gotten bigger, not because I've been using my social media prowess to get it to go bigger. As you just be authentic with what you're expressing and genuine and above all else honest, it'll grow naturally. Even if it niche down into politics, it'll grow. But the amazing thing is that they think they can suppress. And when they can't, then then you start seeing other measures. Like at the government level here, we had this bill that the Liberal government was putting in called Bill C-10. And that sought to regulate the internet the same way they already regulate television and radio, to create certain requirements for Canadian content programming, to pay certain fees, penalties, yada, yada. And they wanted to impose it on the internet. And at first they said, well, we don't want to target individual creators. It's just about, sort of the broadcasters, Netflix and Hulu, maybe, I don't know, the other ones. And then it became clear they did want to include the content creators because they had an exclusion in the law specifically stating this will not apply to independent content creators. And then they took that exclusion out. And then in further explanations, they say, well, if the content creator is acting like a broadcaster, then sure, they should be subjected to these requirements. And you just see how the institutionalized corruption creeps down once they see that people are getting traction and a voice in the wild west of the internet. They say, we got to find a way to suppress those voices that are getting more traction than our state-sponsored media because we want to control the narrative and control the information. So life finds a way, as does truth.
Did that pass? How does that even work? If you're an individual content creator and you have a channel and you're Canadian, isn't all of your content then Canadian? Like, I mean, I don't understand.
It's a good question, and there was no criteria, no threshold. You had the Ministère Guilbeault, the Minister of Heritage, Stephen Guilbeault, saying we don't have, and the way he speaks publicly does not make me feel good. But he gets out there saying, well, if you're a creator and you're acting like a publisher, I was like, what does that mean? How many views does it have to have? It says if you're making money off of it. Oh, so that applies to any content creator making money is now going to be governed by the Broadcasting Act. I mean, a lot of us out here genuinely got the feeling, and probably accurately so, that this law, Bill C-10, could have just been called the Rebel News Bill, because it looked like it was only an attempt to suppress and penalize Rebel News, which has, I don't know if they have more viewers because the state-sponsored media tends to have a lot of viewers, but not a lot of views. They reach millions of people a month. It was, in a lot of people's mind, clearly an attempt to stifle and suppress the independent media that is thriving on social media and the internet. But it didn't pass ultimately because it got held up at the Senate. Then they called the election, which basically means that any bill that did not get passed is a dead bill, and it'll be up for the next government to bring it back up if they want to. And then you realize, like, when it comes to the Conservative Party, the leader, Aaron O'Toole, is at first talking about how, if elected, they're going to repeal Bill C-10. I was like, that's great opposition, Aaron, on Twitter. I was like, how about you just fight the passing of the bill instead of promising to repeal it if and when you get elected? Because Lord knows, once any government tastes power, they don't exactly like to give it up, even if they call themselves conservative. But luckily it didn't pass. We'll see what majority-minority government comes out of the next election, and then whether or not this law ever sees the light of day again.
I should hope not. Folks in America, I don't know if you realize this, but like, if you're a Canadian radio station, you have to play X amount of like Canadian songs. Crazy.
And they don't even know how they establish the criteria, because some totally Canadian content is not deemed to be Canadian content, and then other stuff that's totally not Canadian is deemed to be Canadian. And then you got the CBC running Associated Press articles, stories. It doesn't make sense. The only thing that makes sense about it is it allows for the imposition of fines, and it allows for basically the empowerment of the established legacy media. I mean, that's the bottom line to it.
You know, for as related as we are with Canadians, American, United Statesians, in Spanish, they have a great word for that. It's estadounidense. It's an actual word that means like American citizen, you know, where you say Americans, that doesn't fit. For the estadounidenses here, for us, I'm always shocked at how similar we appear to be to Australia, Canada, and England, but like how different things are in the United States, and we think it's bad here in the U.S., but it is worse in Canada. It is way worse in Australia. It is worse in England. And I
don't think anything's worse in Australia and New Zealand at this point. England, there's some pushback. Europeans tend to push back, but yeah, everyone in America, this has been one of my biggest learning curves. You value freedom the way freedom is supposed to be valued in the States. We value security the way people value security at the expense of freedom.
The content laws were meant to prevent Canada from being overwhelmed by American culture. Isn't that right?
I mean, in theory, yeah, but it's supposed to be good for the economy. Like, you know, make companies that want to come shoot a film up here pay certain fees. I mean, yeah, everything. It was intended to preserve Canadian culture. That's what it was intended to do. What it ended up doing is creating an amazingly big government bureaucracy, as it all does, and it increases the cost of doing business, and it actually, in my humble opinion, actually harms Canadian culture and the preservation of it, because you can't, in as much as people try, you cannot preserve culture through laws. And we tried in Quebec with our Bill 101. I should say it's very difficult to preserve culture through laws. It has to be preserved through identity, and you cannot create a national identity through laws. But what you can do is create a big government bureaucracy, control the media, make it very difficult to do business in Canada, which deters people from shooting content in Canada, and to the detriment of Canada, but to the benefit of the government. So I guess.
I was going to ask you a question about the public square, which I might get back to in a second, but you said this Canadian identity. What do you think the Canadian identity is?
It's not much different than the American identity. It is it's a love for freedom, and it's a love for individualism, with certain exceptions. I mean, it is a question of being polite and looking out for each other and community, but it is fundamentally about respecting the most core values of humanity: freedom of speech, freedom of choice, individual freedoms, because you cannot have social cohesion if you don't have individual freedoms. But what is Canadian? Yeah, love of nature, the respect for nature, the love of your fellow citizens, and the respect of your fellow citizens, which means the respect of their individual choices, and above all else, the respect of the core constitutional values on which Britain, Canada, America were founded. And there's a reason why we have a constitution, and we have the same values in our constitution between Canada and the US. We just don't have the same respect for those constitutional values. You guys, for good or for bad, depending on who you ask, will defend to the death your First and Second Amendments. In Canada, we have a freedom of speech with a big but, and we have freedom of liberty and association with a big but. We have a freedom of mobility with a big but, meaning all of your rights can be infringed upon in as much as justifiable in a free and democratic society. And that has led us to what we have now, which apparently in a free and democratic society, you can be locked in your house after 8 o'clock at night to combat a virus, despite any evidence supporting the measure. And that's a justifiable infringement of our fundamental rights. So we have them here. We just don't respect them as much as you guys do.